You have probably come across two very important titles given to Jesus while reading the Bible: Son of Man and Son of God. Despite their significance, these two titles are often misunderstood. Stay with this video until the end because here you will finally understand the deeper meanings of these titles and their differences, so you will never forget. We know that Jesus has two natures. He is both divine and human. Knowing this might lead us to think that when Jesus referred to himself as the Son of Man, he was speaking of his human nature, and when he called himself the Son of God, he was referring to his divine nature. However, it's not that simple because both of these titles have aspects that refer to both his divinity and his humanity. Interestingly, the emphasis of these titles is almost the exact opposite of what people usually imagine. Let's start with the meaning of Son of Man. Jesus used this title to refer to himself 82 times in the Gospels. But Jesus wasn't the only one called the Son of Man in the Bible. The prophet Ezekiel in the Old Testament also used this term, albeit with a fundamental difference. Jesus did not refer to himself as a Son of Man, as the prophet Ezekiel did, indicating his humanity. He used the definite article, the Son of Man. By the way, this term appears in the Old Testament mostly signifying fragility. Son of Man is simply a poetic way to refer to a human being, highlighting human mortality and fragility. This usage appears frequently in the Psalms and other poetic writings. But what did this title mean to Jesus himself? In Luke 21:27, he says, "And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory." This passage is extremely important for understanding what Jesus meant when he called himself this, because the title Son of Man is described with additional details: clouds, power, and great glory. From this verse, we see that when he uses Son of Man, he is using the term in the same sense presented in Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, which says, "I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And there was given him dominion and glory, and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed." It is this enigmatic figure from Daniel 7 that Jesus clings to, describing himself as the Son of Man. In other words, Jesus is not Son of Man as a generic term for a human being, but is an eschatological term applied directly to the person of the Messiah. And could this Son of Man merely be an angel? No, because in Daniel, angels are clearly described as angels, while this being is never called or described as an angelic being. This passage clearly speaks of someone who had a heavenly origin and received eternal dominion over the entire world. The priests did not fail to notice the connection with this passage when Jesus said, "Thou hast said, Nevertheless I say unto you, Hereafter shall ye see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, and coming in the clouds of heaven." The reference to Daniel 7 was undeniable, and the high priest and his council knew that Jesus was claiming to be the eternal ruler of this world. That's why they said, "He has blasphemed. He is worthy of death." From this event, we see that Jesus finally makes explicit claims that the governance of the world belongs to himself. Also note that in this verse, Jesus combines two Old Testament texts, Psalm 110 and Daniel 7. This psalm, the most quoted in the New Testament, describes the kingdom of the Messiah. At another point, discussing this psalm, Jesus asked the Pharisees, "How say they that Christ is David's son? For David himself saith in the book of Psalms, The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand, until I make thine enemies thy footstool. If David therefore calleth him Lord, how is he then his son?" This question received no answer from the Pharisees, but it is direct. If we are talking about the Messiah, how can he be a descendant of David and, at the same time, be considered superior to David? Who could have greater authority than King David himself? The point is that, although the Messiah would come from David's lineage, he also transcended David. Therefore, the Messiah not only would come from David's lineage, but also would possess a higher authority because he came before David in importance. When Jesus and his disciples were walking through grain fields on the Sabbath, the disciples began to pick heads of grain and eat them, which the Pharisees considered a violation of Sabbath laws. He said, "Therefore the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath." And when he forgave sins, causing an uproar among his contemporaries who said, "Only God has the authority to forgive sins," he responded, "But I will show you that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." This title, Son of Man, which Jesus uses for himself, is a title that refers more to Jesus' divine nature than to his human nature. Notice that we tend to think that Jesus calling himself the Son of Man was an expression of humility, when in fact it was a statement of divine authority. Now, to better understand what Son of God means, we need to pay close attention to what the Gospel of John says. For example, in John 5:8, and Timon 5:18, it is written, "Therefore the Jews sought the more to kill him, because he not only had broken the Sabbath, but said also that God was his Father, making himself equal with God." The Jews understood this message directly from Jesus, which led them to this conclusion. In John 8:57-58, the Jews mocked Jesus by asking, "You have seen Abraham, who lived 2,000 years ago?" Jesus answered, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am." By using the expression "I am," Jesus was identifying himself with God, who in Exodus 3:14 said, "I am who I am." For the Jews, this was extreme blasphemy unless it was true. Another example is in John 10:33, where the Jews tried to stone Jesus, saying, "We are not stoning you for any good work, but for blasphemy, because you, a mere man, claim to be God." Later, before Pontius Pilate, the Jews insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God." But why would Jesus claim to be the Son of God be considered blasphemy and worthy of death, if in the Old Testament the people of Israel and other beings were called sons of God, and yet they were not considered God? Again, because the Jewish leaders perfectly understood what Jesus meant by the phrase Son of God. Being the Son of God in the way Jesus spoke implied having the same nature as God. In other words, in the sense used by Jesus, the Son of God is God. This claim of equality with God was seen as blasphemy by the Jewish leaders, and that's why they demanded Jesus' death, according to Leviticus 24:15. Hebrews 1:3 reinforces this idea, stating, "The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being." Note that the expression Son of God came to mean much more than just a human Messiah. In the Gospel of John, it implies that Jesus was making himself God, which made his claims even more deadly in the eyes of the Jewish leaders. The more Jesus claimed this title, the more dangerous his position became. In the end, it was this claim of divinity and royalty that led to his condemnation. The first 3 verses of Hebrews make this term much clearer in a simply astounding way. They emphatically say that the Son is the one whom God appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe. This Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. Jesus is the exact nature of God duplicated, which makes him exactly like God in all his attributes. Furthermore, he continuously upholds the universe by his powerful word, something only God can do. If we combine what all these passages say, we will see that the title Son of God, when applied to Christ, firmly declares his divinity, someone equal to the Father in all his attributes. But also note that the title Son of God is first given in the Scriptures to those who manifest obedience to the Father. Sonship is defined predominantly not in biological terms, but in terms of being in agreement or submission to God. Jesus himself, in his discussions with the Pharisees, who claimed to be sons of Abraham, rebuked them and said, "You belong to your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires." So notice that this title also carries its aspect of humility and submission of Jesus to his Father. The Son of God is the one who obeys God. And this leads us to the more human aspect of Christ's nature. The titles Son of Man and Son of God are fundamental to understanding the complex nature of Jesus Christ, revealing both his humanity and his divinity. Understanding these titles in light of the Scriptures allows us a deeper insight into Jesus' identity and mission. Son of Man and Son of God are not just theological designations but strategic revelations of Christ's nature. Understanding these two titles leads us to recognize the totality of Jesus as true God and true man, whose authority, power, and obedience culminate in his redemptive work for humanity.
Now, if you want to deepen your understanding of the Bible, check out my exclusive material, Mind Maps of all the books of the Scriptures. By getting this material, you'll receive exclusive bonuses to boost your study journey even further. With over 100 complete and organized mind maps, your learning will be easier and more efficient. Don't miss out. Click the link in the video description to secure your material now.
Now I will leave another video on the screen that you might also like. Click there, and I will see you in a few seconds. Until next time.